The following interview was part of the research carried out for an episode of Imagining Tomorrow, a hope-filled podcast made in partnership with Friends of the Earth. A link to the episode can be found in the video notes, or you can go to foe.uk/Imagining Tomorrow to find all of the episodes released so far. Enjoy! Hi, thanks so much for joining me today. Could you introduce yourself for everybody who is watching and listening?
I'm Una McCormack, and I'm a New York Times bestselling science fiction writer.
I'm so excited to talk to you because I'm such a Star Trek nerd.
Hooray!
Such a Star Trek nerd, and also it's so in line with the things that I'm trying to achieve with this podcast of looking at positive futures, and you get to play in the ultimate pop culture utopian future as your job.
So I really do. Yes, I write Star Trek novels. I write some Doctor Who stuff as well, which is also very optimistic. I've tended to specialise in the bits of Star Trek that are a little less utopian. But part of that, I think, is it's let me examine the Star Trek utopia and what some of the assumptions are behind it. And also, which I think Star Trek itself has been doing in its most recent shows, see what happens to utopia when it's under stress and whether it can survive that or what it needs to do to, keep that momentum, keep that dream alive. So yes, I've got to do Star Trek with a twist.
And that's, the thing that I love about that as well, is that when I'm very much a Next Generation fan, and I'm still dipping into the newer stuff, and it's my comfort place. And yet watching it, those underlying assumptions are really fascinating. And every bit of science fiction we ever consume is a product of its time, obviously, and is about its time. And that's really fascinating. So I'm kind of mindful that whatever we talk about today in the ideas that we spin up together are going to be a product of our time and our fears, just like all science fiction is, even if we're going to be trying to be positive about it, because we have to be mindful of the barriers and the things that are holding us back from that so we can overcome them.
Exactly that. I think in many ways, Gene Roddenberry, bless him, almost had an easier time coming up with Utopia in the 1966 or whenever it was. You felt you were still on an upward trajectory once you kind of hit the 90s was sort of a last gasp of that. But after that, I think we're all a bit mindful now of climate change and rising fascism and all of these kinds of things. But to try and keep utopia alive, I think, to try and keep it going as a process and a method and a way of being in the world, I think that's a really important task. And on the whole, I think the guys doing the new shows have done pretty well.
Absolutely, yes. From what I've seen of the bits I've been dipping into, yeah, very much so. And it's interesting because in Next Generation, which again, that's my comfort zone, so I feel more confident talking about that. There are a few episodes where they talk about things like climate change and thinking about the fact that, that's late 80s, early 90s. Yeah. It's like, well, I'm glad you were talking about that back then, but damn, we still haven't sorted this out.
Yes, we're all worried about it, aren't we? There's still, we're worried about ozone depletion. We're worried about all kinds of things, and they're talking about it from then. So, why has it taken so long for us to do anything? It's like starting a new piece of work, isn't it? Oh, I'll start it tomorrow. Oh my goodness, it's due.
Yeah, and add in a great big dollop of some very, very wealthy people who really don't want things to change and really don't want to lose what they have.
Yeah,
it's quite surprising. And there's also, I'm thinking about, there's an episode called The Drumhead as well, where they talk about the dangers of people just really getting behind an ideology because of a forceful person and it twisting everything around them, and watching that episode recently and thinking, oh my goodness, this is still so relevant. And it's great stuff.
I mean, my favourite one is Deep Space Nine, which obviously is a little bit more sideways on, a little bit more critical of its own premise. And I've just been reading an excellent book about it by David Seitz, which I can really encourage people. It's kind of the first in-depth study of Deep Space Nine. And it reminds you about these episodes that are about homelessness in San Francisco in the 2020s. And you sort of look at it and go, that's completely predicted. They create these sort of sanctuary zones that people are pushed into, which are sort of parts of the city that, you know, if you haven't got a place to live, that's where you end up. A sort of combination of a ghetto and a workhouse in a way. Forgotten people. I mean, I think maybe San Francisco right now is even more dreadful, that people just step over the poverty they see. It's a little bit more like Neverwhere, isn't it? You know, people are just ignoring the problems that are physically in front of them. But Deep Space Nine's on top of it, you know, rise of authoritarianism, homelessness, all of these things as well. We're still waiting for the Irish reunification of 2024, of course. That's
Yes.
the promise of next gen.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. Oh, it makes my nerd heart so happy. It makes me so. There are so few occasions I have to talk to somebody who is just as passionate about that universe as I am. So this is making me deeply happy.
Oh my goodness, we need to do this more often.
we do. I just need to be able to clone myself to do all of the things that I want to do. But you know what that's like.
I know what's that's like. Yeah, absolutely.
So I'm going to drag myself away from my comfort program and to where we are here and now, so that we can do the stuff that we do as part of our job as science fiction authors. And it's the part of my job that I really love the most, in terms of looking at where things are now, looking at a potential technology that could change something, and then extrapolating forwards and thinking, well, what would that change and what would be the knock-on effects of that? And so the episode that this conversation is going to feed into is a really interesting combination that it didn't occur to me until I started researching and looking into this, between infrared heating technology and interfaith organisations, and a particular one in Birmingham looking to reduce the carbon footprint of faith buildings. And I was wondering if there was anything about that combination, or about the interfaith group or the technology, that really excited you, that you wanted to kick off this conversation with.
So I was brought up Catholic, and I've sat in a lot of very cold buildings over the years. Yeah. So when I looked at this technology, first of all, I thought it was beautiful. I thought it was absolutely. It felt toasty warm just looking at it on the page, on the screen. I had a look at their website. So you kind of felt warmed by it. And then I think what they've done, which I always find very pleasing in technology, is, well, they've been very, very clever at spotting a market and spotting a need. But also the design of it is really beautiful. I think the church that I looked at, they're almost like chandeliers. So they had beautifully they'd really gone to the trouble of thinking, you know, these are going to be heritage sites, and we're going to have to, you can't just put stuff in and not think about the aesthetic design of it as much as the technology. So there were many, many things that I liked about this. And I think then what it got me thinking about was how few places in a city now you could kind of go and say, how do we open this up to as many people as possible? That a church or a mosque or a faith space, you might open up and it could act as a community centre. There are very, very few other spaces. I was thinking, what are the big cavernous spaces in cities and towns these days? And it was hard, actually, to think of them. I think the closest I've got, I had the good fortune to go to Berlin earlier in the year. And I made a commitment a few years ago to travel by train to Europe. So I had a lovely trip to Berlin. And then you arrive at the redesigned Hauptbahnhof, which opened in about 2006. And it's an incredible building. It's on 3 levels. So you've got kind of 2 levels of trains, and then you've got 3 levels of sort of use, people passing through. And almost all of that space is commercial. And you think, well, first of all, this must have been silent during COVID, just complete this huge space. And secondly, you think, would you design a space like that now? Would you design a project this big, this central to a city, a huge international city, and go, and all of this space in this is going to be shops. It's like, well, you could just do shops, or you could think of something else. And that, I think, was as I arrived at that station, I thought, imagine what else we could have done with this space, and what else could have been brought to the heart of a city that people could have used without feeling the need to spend. And almost in a way, that project, on a fundamental level, was misconceived. Yeah, not the space or the desire to integrate public transport or all these things. And Berlin is great for kind of public transport, but there was a kind of failure of imagination of how that great cavern, that great cathedral, could have been used. And I've been thinking about it ever since. So when this kind of came in front of me, I thought, well, imagine if we could take these shopping centres, heat them cheaply, and use some of that saving to open up these spaces in some way. And that's what really, really inspired me, or really made me think about this technology. Is that the kind of thing you were thinking about as well, Laura?
Absolutely, absolutely. The whole erosion of third spaces is something that's really been on my mind as well. And I kind of feel a little bit guilty saying this given the context of the episode, but I was thinking about it in terms of a secular space as well. That
exactly, yeah.
There are so few places where we can come together as people where we don't have to pay for the right to be there.
Exactly that.
And it's so awful. And the places where we don't have to pay to be there overtly are spaces like you described, commercial spaces, which are designed to almost pressure us into spending anyway. And I'm also thinking about like the sensory assault of these really big commercial centres, you know, the transport hub that you talked about, how tiring it is to be in these places. And airports.
Don't even. Yeah.
they're stressful places anyway, and then filling them with shops and all of the glaring lights and the advertising everywhere. And thinking about faith spaces, so many of them are so beautiful, you know, whether there's the intricate patterns of a mosque, whether it's the Gothic arches of an ancient nave, the stillness that it can elicit within ourselves when we can be in those spaces is really magical, and I think
it's
almost
completely different,
needed.
isn't it? Yeah, I completely agree. And we used to have the will to do these. I agree. I think this sort of absence of a secular space, that I don't want to shop, and I don't want to pray, but I do want to be. Yeah, okay. And I want a commons that exists that can enable me to just inhabit a space. And you're completely right. I hadn't thought about the sensory aspects of it. The closest we have, or used to have, was libraries, I think. But then to some extent there's a code of being there. I think they're starting to fulfill functions that we need to admit they're fulfilling and start supporting them as spaces that people can go to and be warm. Yeah. Okay, we need to question why that's going on. As spaces that carers of young children can go to and you know, have something to do. and that's the sort of and some of these old buildings, as well as some of the old libraries, are really, really beautiful as well. One of our Victorian ones in Cambridge, where I live, was taken over as a by the local Hindu community, who sadly can't afford to keep it going anymore, and it's a listed building. So we're kind of going, well, what's going to happen to that space? Is it going to get converted into flats, you know, which sort of privatises them again? What can be done to a space like that means it continues to have to be a space where people can go and just be. Yeah. So these big spaces, we've got to find something to do with them and get them back somehow. And if you can reduce the cost of heating them, then you don't have the need to sort of bring in shopping outlets to finance them.
Yeah, absolutely. And there are quite a lot of faith spaces where they also have like morning playgroup groups and things like that. And this technology facilitates that really, really well.
Yeah.
I think you're entirely right with the social context of the library, because, you know, there are very few spaces I like more than a library. You know, give me a nice library and I'm away. But in terms of socializing, there, you know, even if there is an activity, you know, I've been to the library so many times when there's been like a play group or a reading group, and it is absolutely beautiful seeing a story time happening, or, you know, other kinds of activities during half term or things like that. But it's not a space you can go to with your mates and sit around and chat. And that's not what it's for. And it shouldn't be pressured into being that because of a lack of spaces elsewhere.
Exactly that.
There was years ago, I think it was somewhere in Covent Garden, I heard about a group that was starting up effectively a secular church, as in it was a regular Sunday morning knees up, basically. And by knees up, I mean like the old-fashioned northern definition of you get together in the pub and you sing your favourite songs.
Yep.
And that kind of cultural gathering of meeting up with people socially in a regular time, in a regular space, to sing songs that everybody knows and you love. Like in 2 occasions of my life, I've been in places where somebody has spontaneously started singing Bohemian Rhapsody, and we have all started singing it.
Of course you can. Who can resist it? Yeah.
Yeah, you can't resist it, and everyone just knows it. And there are so many songs like that, and the feeling of that without it being as pressured as perhaps being part of a choir when you don't sing very well.
You don't
things
want to
like
join
that.
a choir, and you know, if you tried to do that in a library, you might be sort of politely asked to leave. You know? We have a big shopping centre here in Cambridge that's closing down. So it opened in the 80s. It's a bit of a disgrace, actually. They ploughed down a load of beautiful Victorian buildings, a whole district of kind of Victorian cottages that they, you know, little terraces that they knocked down. Terrible housing shortage in Cambridge, and they stuck up this big shopping centre, and in the 80s it had a little heyday, but it's always been in a kind of decline mode since I was here, and COVID finished for it. You know, it was where Debenhams was. It was where that kind of big department store that people just don't go to anymore. You know, they buy online, they go to John Lewis, or to Primark, which is across the road. So with this huge cavernous space now, just emptied, I will say, when I went in for the first time after COVID, it was the cleanest I'd ever seen it. Yeah, I kind of went, well, this is actually a great space, you know. So they'd opened up a little ping pong parlour, which was free to use. They just put some ping pong tables in. And I thought, well, that's brilliant. That's you know, stopping a bunch of 14-year-olds from sitting outside in the cold drinking Alco Pops. They can be inside drinking Alco Pops, you know, but at least they're warm, you know, or they're discouraged from bringing in the alcohol from into the building. So there was something to do, yeah. And then other little spaces opened up. There was a big public art, one of these wild art trails that they have in towns every so often. There was enough space when that had finished to bring them all in. And if you'd missed them, you could just wander around. And so it was like a little impromptu gallery opened. And I assume this is all owned by the council, presumably, like lots of councils, they're on the verge of going bust. And that's the problem for kind of doing this thing. But the space is there. And you could take a space like that if you decided you're going to knock down a load of 80s cottages, kind of 19th century cottages, and you're going to build this thing, then keep it as a kind of, exactly what you were saying, a sort of secular commons. It's like having a park for the winter, yeah? In the winter, you'd go to the park, but you can't, you know. And then maybe in the summer, I was thinking, okay, well, these are technologies that are warming spaces. In the summer, increasingly, particularly in Cambridge, there's a few days in the year now where you just can't go outside during the day. We're hitting 40. Okay, so maybe there's a space where you could go to that's cool, but you're not stuck at home. You are able to go out and see people and go, oh, terribly hot today, isn't it? This kind of thing. And then it doesn't have to be kids. It can be, it can be adolescents. It can be older people who, know that there's a space to go that's safe that there are things to do that you don't have to be, you don't, just because you're sitting somewhere, you don't feel obliged to buy a cake. Yeah. And we don't seem to have those anymore. And I wish we did. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I think what we're talking about here is the failure of neoliberal economics and how it's been steadily destroying society. And we can see now the impact of wealth being extracted to a very small number of people through, taxation policies that are designed to do that, let's face
exactly
it.
That. Yeah.
And we can see that. We can see that society needs to have that pool of resources. It drives me absolutely batty that so many people are like, I wish it was like it was in the 1950s and the 1960s. And it's like, well, then bring back that taxation structure, for goodness sake, because the top rate tax levels were completely different than they are today.
Absolutely.
And we're seeing that. So the whole thing of these current large spaces being hyper-focused on commercialism and consumerism is one of those symptoms, right? That there is no current, in the way things are at the moment, there's no way to make it economically viable to just provide these common spaces, because there's no common wealth or resources within our society anymore.
Well,
and it's heartbreaking.
That's all been extracted. And I think there's I think like when the building like that Berlin station went up, a kind of lack of imagination that you could use this space for anything other than shops. What do we do with a big space? We put some shops there. No, well, think about other things you might be able to do. I think as well, I've been reading an excellent book which I can commend to people. It's by an economist called Kate Raworth, I think it's pronounced, Raworth. And she's written a book called Donut Economics, right? Okay. And it's a model for how we might conceive economics in the 21st century. So instead of a kind of, she goes into questions about green growth and degrowth, but her sort of a central image that she wants to get home is, right, imagine a donut. Okay, you've got a circle inside another circle. The outside circle is sort of the environmental limits that we have, right? And the inside circle is the basic social needs that we have. And our policies should be designed, so our economic policies, all of our policies, should be designed to keep us inside this donut, yeah? So there are basic social needs that we have to fulfill, but we have an upper limit of what the earth can sustain. So how do we design policies that fall within this donut? And then she sort of shows you where we are, and you look at it and go, oh dear, yeah. Yeah. And then she goes through sort of 6 or 7 different things we can start to think about to kind of bring us within this. And I've really enjoyed it. I thought it was a great book. I'm not an economist at all. I was a sociologist, so I'm like their ancestral enemy, It's kind of like the other end of the social science. And then I had the good luck. I was at a sort of little drinks thing in London the other night, and the room was full of sort of senior civil servants and academics and this kind of thing. And I was talking to an economist, an academic, and I said, okay, I don't know your discipline at all, but I've been reading this book. Now you tell me how fringe it is. And he went, well, about 15 years ago, maybe. But his sense now is that economics as a discipline is kind of looking at itself and going, so I'm talking about the academy here, and perhaps some sort of government as well. The discipline is looking at itself and going, yeah, we've got to think about what we're doing. Yeah, we've got to think about the power that these ideas have and the effects that they're having. And I found that really heartening. It's like anthropology 100 years ago or 60 years ago going, actually, guys, there's a lot of damage been done by this discipline and the knowledge that we're generating. To sort of to talk to a professional economist and hear him say, no, those ideas are being taken seriously. Yeah. So, okay, all right, that's good news.
That really is. Yeah. That is really heartening. And it's because you can see it now, like everyone I've spoken to in the last year here in the UK has been, it doesn't matter who they voted for, what level of economic income or, what socioeconomic slot they're in, everybody has said, it's really scary how everything is falling apart. We can see everything falling apart.
Yeah.
And it's like, yes, now there are so many people who used to be able to ignore a lot of the worst things in society, were able to live a life where they didn't brush against that. And now they're really brushing against it. And even though it's horrible, I'm glad that more people are seeing what has been reality for so many people for decades.
Yeah,
and it just shows that creep.
And I think even if you're lucky enough not to be directly affected, if you're a little, this is not true for everyone at a certain age, but if you've been lucky enough to sort of, you might be in your 60s or 70s now, I think it's hitting not just your kids but your grandkids, perhaps, and you're starting to see, oh well, actually, that there are effects here, and you must be noticing that it's a lot hotter. Maybe than it used to be, or things are more expensive, and it is sort of trickling through. I think people are starting to see it. So yeah, I think we all know there's been a massive extraction of wealth, and a kind of upward, almost a theft of wealth, and a theft of which translates into a theft of commons and a theft of institutions. We all know. And I'm hoping that we're, at least in the UK at least, we're sort of within maybe 15 months of it turning round. But I don't know about you, I feel the race is on for what we can salvage in many ways, or what it will need to turn it round. I'd rather not go through a depression and, a kind of rise of far right. But even more, I'd rather not go through that cycle before we go, hey, tell you what, a New Deal might be a good idea. Because I think we all know what needs to be done. We just don't seem to get around to doing it.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think that one of the things I'm hopeful of in the UK is that we have seen the impact of letting populist policy take the reins for a significant period of time. And they're having to go so far to the right now to appeal to that anger and injustice that they've always kind of tried to latch onto and blame it on whatever outgroup they want to direct people's anger towards, that it's getting so extreme now that most people are like, oh, come on. Yeah. You were telling us that you were going to be solving all these problems, and X number of years later, none of these problems are solved. I really hope that people will start to see through it, because it's kind of frightening. But I am very glad that you had that conversation with The Economist. And I also think that stories like, I'm bringing it back to the positive interpretation of what we can see before us, and what we can see before us in terms of the materials gathered from the interviews for this episode is a company where somebody from the Church of England went to them and said, hey, could you do this thing? And they were like, we were thinking about doing that anyway, brilliant, let's go, and turned it around super fast as a result. So there was a really unlikely, in my mind, alliance, maybe that's unfair, but an interesting alliance of need and being able to satisfy that need for a group of people. And they said that they're very close to installing the first model in mosques, which I can't wait to see the aesthetics for that.
We've got
really,
a beautiful,
really beautiful.
There's a beautiful new mosque in Cambridge, which is it's only a few years old actually, and it's been designed on kind of green lines, and I've not had a chance to visit it yet, but it strikes me as exactly the kind of space where you would be able to, if they haven't already, I suspect not already, because this technology is so new. Yeah, I think what interested me about this is, and it touches a little maybe on some of the things we've already said, is that I think because faith groups and faith organisations are still, because they are separate from business, or which is very powerful now, or state, which, as we know, has been kind of it has been whittled away and withered. They're one of the few remaining places or types of organisation that can be doing this sort of thing. And I was starting to think, well, where else could this happen? I think universities are as kind of large enough kind of organisation. Oh, the other thing I thought was significant was how it was kind of locally driven. Yeah, that it was the Church of England had clearly set a policy about, okay, let's get the carbon emissions down. But then individual churches on the ground were able to go, right, we're going to try this. So they had the power locally at really quite a devolved level to be able to do that kind of thing. And the only other spaces that I could think of would be something like schools or universities, who are unfortunately subject to much more centralized control than perhaps faith groups would be, or faith organizations. So universities, I could see being able to, because they own land, they have big buildings, they tend to put up a lot of student accommodation or quite a lot of vanity buildings, new business schools. But if universities could be, as they once were, encouraged to think of themselves much more as operating within a kind of local social ecosystem, then this would be a place where this kind of project could be financed or opened up. Universities tend to be quite siloed now. I think they sort of look to other universities rather than to the town that they're in or the city that they're in, the kind of geography. So universities, perhaps, I think schools, particularly if they've got Victorian buildings, would do really well out of something like this, actually. As long as the concrete hasn't fallen down around them in the meantime.
I know, what a state this country is in.
Literally, the schools are falling down. I mean, people aren't daft. They see this and they understand what's happening, I think. Fingers crossed. So yes, that was I was thinking, okay, faith groups can do this because of the way that they're devolved to make their own decision making. And I think that's another structural problem in Britain, is that we have so much that's centralised and very limited ability. I mean, we kind of, there are sort of headline things like a mayor of Manchester, or Andy Burnham's King of the North or whatever, yeah, or a mayor of London. That's a genuinely, I think, devolved power, obviously to Wales and Scotland, but not on a local level where a group of people could go, we can retool this community centre in some way. People don't feel like they own community centres, perhaps because they can't really make decisions about them. Those are in the hands of other people. So the spaces that we do have locally, I don't think people have much control over or say over. But churches and mosques, there's going to be quite a tight group of people who are able to make actual decisions and install things like this. And we want to replicate that model, I think.
Yeah, I think that is a really good point. I think that what this shows is the power of community, because there is a type of community cohesion based around faith and faith spaces that I think has been eroded away so catastrophically in wider kind of secular society. And we had like a glimpse.
Yeah, Margaret Thatcher said that there's no such thing as society. Okay, all right then, well...
This is what you get.
But there is, there is.
Yeah, there is. And this is what you get when you starve it. These are the problems that we're seeing come home to roost now because of that fundamental ideology to erode and ultimately, destroy the state as much as you can get away with. Sell as much of it off as you can to your mates and get rich before... your time's up. It's just appalling. But those community groups, the interfaith groups coming together and working together, being able to help each other and to mobilize groups of people in a grassroots movement, you can see little tiny pockets of that springing up in other places to do with, growing spaces and community gardens and things like that.
Yeah. And I think there was another thing that I read. This came out of the Kate Raworth book, and I sort of chased it up. It's a writer called Janine Benyus. I'm not sure how to pronounce it. Benyus. And she's an American science writer and calls an innovation consultant, I think what you would say. And what she's interested in, a thing she calls biomimicry, which is how social organisations sort of mimic... can consciously design to mimic aspects of the natural world. And and she kind of came up with this idea of what she calls generous cities, right? So these are cities that instead of being constantly a kind of drain on resources, whether that's the local aquifer or, pumping rubbish into the water or generating pollution, they're cities that are consciously designed to work with the natural world that they're operating in. So you might have buildings that worked to reduce carbon, or that treat their own wastewater, or that you've got pavements that absorb stormwater and all these sorts of things. And it's a beautiful visionary idea, yeah. But the problem was that when these ideas were brought to organisations, say a business was about to have a new head office, they would be presented with these ideas, and they would go, well, why would we do that? Right, okay. And then people go, because ultimately the answer is because it's a nice thing to do for other people. And they were like, well, I can't see the shareholder interest in that. Yeah. And so that the big leap was in persuading people that generosity is a smart move. Yeah. And you have to you just have to keep chipping away at it. It's very hard to claw that back once you've commercialized things. But we need to sort of tap, not that it's philanthropy, which is kind of corrosive in its own way, but that generosity is a sort of mode of being in the world that, is good for us all. Yeah. You don't have to be competitive all the time. Yeah. You don't have to be chasing shareholder value. There are other ways that you could build or design. So I loved this idea of things that stimulate generosity. And I thought that was perhaps what lay behind the decision to implement these kinds of heating devices. We could just not bother, we could turn on the old clanking Victorian boiler, or we could consciously and mindfully look at this building and find a technology that, the reductions in carbon that they were reporting were incredible. And presumably that means their electricity bill goes down. So, kind of win all round in a way. Yeah. So I think in all of these things, we're always straddling, I think, a really fine line between what people can do on a kind of local level and what should properly be kind of done by the state. Because I think this is it's the Cameron trap of the big society, isn't it? Oh, well, let's just all devolve it down to a local level. It will sort itself out. Well, it doesn't actually. It ends in food banks and, kids, 1 in 4 kids going hungry. It doesn't work. And properly, there needs to be stuff that's delivered by the state. But anything that can sort of, in all ways, it's making a kind of social ecosystem as diverse as possible, isn't it? Diversity rules, yeah. As Jean Roddenberry told us.
Absolutely. I could not agree more with you. This whole argument of certain political viewpoints that you should shrink the state as much as possible and that the free market will take care of everything is such an absurdity to me, because when your basic reason for being is to maximize profit for the people who have invested in your business, and that's all you care about, this is what you get. You get a crumbling society, because there is nobody in that mindset that feels the value, the inherent value, as you say, in terms of being generous.
Exactly.
And it's I was thinking about, this constant kind of, but we can do both, that is on the kind of the intersection between business interests and maybe not wanting to be quite as evil as people have been in recent years. And I'm thinking about things like the recent Christmas tree installation is it Paddington or King's Cross? I can't remember which one it is, where they've installed this great big tools. It's like at the bottom, at the base, there are several reading nooks, and then there are books that go all the way up. Have you seen the pictures online?
It's at St Pancras. I walked past it the other day. Yeah, I thought it looked really cosy.
Yeah, and when I saw that, I thought, wow, actually, maybe there is potential for some kind of better relationship, because they are actually providing a little tiny nook They've provided something beautiful. Yes, in those nooks, you are listening to portions of audiobooks that they hope that you will buy. And yes, they are advertising a business.
Well,
maybe I'm biased because, I like books.
It's next door to Hatchards, which I think is the...
Right.
Now, St Pancras, oddly, is a space that I find even though it is clearly, a big shopping centre. I find it oddly appealing. I think there are quiet pockets in it. You sort of go upstairs, and it's there are places to sit. There's interesting, not always delightful public art. They've managed to knock down the hotel and these kinds of things. I'm very, very fond of St Pancras, and I think it's also great that my train goes in there, and then that's also another thing. But yes, I love that, and I know it is trying to make me go into Hatchards and buy books, but I would probably be doing that anyway. And yes, I had exactly that. I walked past, and I thought, oh, I would like to sit there for 10 minutes and just have a little read. They're so not sustained, though, are they? They're kind of not. Yeah,
exactly. There's a bit of me that's kind of I'm so conflicted about it, because on the one hand I'm like, look, that's a better way to do this, and oh look, we only get a quite nice thing because it's selling something. This is exactly the problem that we've been talking about. But where is the money, where is the funding to do that? And I guess that is also the strength within the faith organizations, that they are going to have some sort of budget. I don't know how money works in any kind of faith organizations, but I'm assuming, because there are buildings that are maintained and there's a whole structure there, and some own land, etc., 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 that there is potentially some kind of income or resource that doesn't exist for an average community group getting together and saying, let's make our community hall less cold, please.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, I mean, I assume the Church of England owns a lot of land, which is, and I don't know if I don't know much about I've not looked at the annual report or anything like that, so I don't know. I know a lot of churches struggle to stay open. I don't know how it sort of works in the way that how money is devolved or so on. And the problem is, of course, with the secular or kind of commons or state or locally run institutions of this, is that we've just had a massive 50 years of wealth extraction. We know where that money is. Yeah, it's all gone to buy dodgy PPE and fund private planes and things. So we know where the money is, and we just probably need to. The Kate Rayworth book goes into how we could tax differently. Yeah, so that we don't tax wealth, we tax hanging on to wealth. Yeah, okay. So if you sort of hang on to it for too long, then you face a kind of progressive taxation that is going, okay, well, you need to get that back into the economy in some way. So she goes through lots of sort of different strategies for taxation and that kind of thing that might bring a little bit more wealth circulating, and to stop us thinking of money as a thing to acquire, but money as a thing that should be moving around. Yeah. But again, it kind of takes the will of a government to do something about it, I think. Let's see.
Yeah, and that's the thing, isn't it? Because that is where you have to have the state do something, because none of us can do this. None of us can make super absurdly wealthy people pay more tax. Yeah. We can't stop them finding all of those loopholes. We can't stop them having infiltrated so deeply into government that they stop these things changing. We need... I think one of the things that I've also been very mindful of in recent years is the destruction of the social contract in politics, of when somebody really screws up and everyone is angry about it, they resign. We've lost that. That's been broken in recent years. And I remember as a kid, things coming out that people wouldn't bat their eyelid at these days now, but it comes out and they resign. And now we have people doing, really illegal things.
Yeah.
and just going, well, what are you going to do about it? And
the days
not resign,
the
that
foreign
decency's gone.
Resigning over taking the country to war are gone, I think. Yeah. It's not that sort of thing. And it corrodes on it just corrodes on at every level, doesn't it? It's we always joke that we don't trust politicians, and a scandal might come out. But if the scandals are just in the open, it's a sort of toxicity, I think. The other problem as well, I think I've sort of alluded to this already, is that that it is limited what we can do as individuals, or but also I think that's a problem with local governance in Britain, that you can get onto the council. I mean, Cambridge is at a standstill, more or less, because of the complexity of governance. You've kind of got the city, and then you've got so the city's either Labour or Lib Dem, just depending on the mood. The county is always Conservative. It's very rural. Then you've got a kind of 2 or 3 other governance structures, a kind of local Cambridgeshire partnership. Something else is going on as well. And the upshot of this is that you can't get a pavement fixed, yeah? Or you can't get a pothole fixed. And these kinds of things are really basic things. You're kind of going, the structure here is now so complicated. I'm in a group that's sort of a pedestrians, raising the profile of pedestrians around a city it's got very powerful cycling lobby, yeah. So they're not always the same thing, guys. But trying to get anything done is crackers. It's impossibly hard. It's really revealing, and until somebody lets go and says, well, actually, people are quite good at walking around their local area and going, well, that probably needs sorting out, or well, that's a bit of a mess, or we could fix this by doing that. But somebody hangs on to the power higher up, and until we release a little bit of that, we're going to struggle to be able to do meaningful things as secular groupings, I think. This is why universities, I think, perhaps might be a space where this could happen. Who knows? Yeah. But we're meant to be positive.
We are. I was just about to say, it's so easy. I mean, we live in the year of our Lord 2023, and we're in the UK. We have got a lot to vent.
Oh, yeah. But I'm almost, in a way, I'm positive, because I think people are talking in this way. I don't think it's just, people like us who are science fiction writers and have been crossed for 15 years or whatever, if not longer. I think there's a real bottling up of energy, and that kind of explosion can be frightening. And we need to mitigate that. But maybe an explosion of energy and of creativity and of people looking and saying, well, we need new solutions to the situation that we're in. Perhaps I'm going to be positive and say I think that's coming as well, because you did see it in things like the New Deal or the welfare state and all these things. We've built incredible things. Y2K, we solved that bug. COVID vaccines, incredible. We got them out. I mean, I can't get one. But that's not a problem of science or imagination. That's a problem of, I don't know, some mad decision in Department for Health. So all of these things, I think there's tremendous creativity. And I think a real sort of focusing of what the problems are and a desire to do something about them. That's my positivity. We're living in interesting times, sadly. But, perhaps what comes out the other end is going to be something different and imaginative and thoughtful and considered. So that would be my sort of glimmer of hope, I think.
I couldn't agree more. And thinking about, if we say, okay, this technology enables any kind of large space, but let's just focus on faith spaces, because they can be small buildings, they can be large buildings. We know that they are numerous. That is the thing that is good about them. And they are embedded in the heart of urban centres as well as rural locations. So as a potential venue for third space activities, which are both faith-based and secular, this technology being able to heat them more cheaply than Victorian boilers or standard, 80s, 90s central heating for newer buildings, with a combination of good insulation, all of the measures that the Footsteps group are taking in Birmingham. I'd like to think about, if those third spaces did exist and they existed within the faith buildings, could there be that community cohesion that breaches the faith arena? I'm thinking about if there was a place down the road which had a beautiful building. It was warm in the winter, and they had sessions which were just drop-in sessions which had nothing to do with anything religious at all.
Yeah.
Perhaps it was a book group or a stitching group or something like that, where it was inviting the community in, which is very much in line with what a lot of faith groups want to do.
Yeah.
And that technology makes it cheap enough to do that, to run
exactly. Yeah.
That could be beautiful.
The nicest thing I did with my kid when they were a baby was, and obviously you would have to be more careful about this now, was we went to a care home that was round the corner. And some of these old people were quite a long way past it. You know, they were very sort of quiet and sleepy. And every couple of weeks, a handful of, 9-month to 15-month-old came in and bashed a few plastic things together and crawled about and went, hello. And just occasionally you would see these eyes open and there was a bit of a smile. And, and it was easily the best thing that we did. Of course, the land got sold. So the home closed down. Oh, and honestly, typical, isn't it? But it was just these little moments. I called it brief utopia, where you're just briefly for a couple of hours inhabiting a space where goodwill and kindness, generosity, and a sense of peace in the world are sort of generated. And if these spaces could exist, and not just in the cracks, isn't that the phrase, the cracks of the world machine? Yeah. Not just in the cracks, but more as a kind of consciously cultivated and gardened. Imagine if you could, if instead of empty shopping malls, there were spaces where the local care home, a group of them could come out. There were some small kids there that they could watch play. It's very calming if you don't have to look after them. Very calming watching, it's just lovely. Or just animals, or just more greenery, or, there's so much we could do with what we have, I think, and kind of cultivate this generosity of being in the world, I think. That would be my hope.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty positive version of the future. I think we can take that. We can have that.
Yeah.
That sounds really good to me. Yeah, because I think the thing with this technology is that fundamentally it is cheaper to heat cavernous spaces
exactly
with that.
Exactly.
With, approaching it from a completely different angle of creating those heat bubbles, etc., etc. And that it always comes, trapped as we are in the situation we're in, it is always going to come down to economics, at least in the short term, of what you can do with what little you have available, and that this could be a way to unlock that in so many spaces. And if we
took all those 80 shopping malls and there's like a little gallery of local artist collectives. You've got the Potters have got their space. Honestly, I'm such an old hippie. I've read too much Le Guin. Yeah, the local school kids were able to come in and see the local pottery collective at work and this kind of thing. Or, we had a little petting zoo at one end or something. I don't know. There's all sorts of things we could do. A few allotments at the back. Everybody wants an allotment in Cambridge. There's no. The waiting list is like 5 years. Instead, we've got an empty Debenhams,
Yeah, I mean, there's another episode I'm doing which explores vertical farming, and that's one of the things that I'm talking about in that is look at all of these commercial buildings that we're really underutilising now post-COVID. What if you could have leafy greens right in the centre of town where people want to eat them? Yeah, you could use those spaces.
The other, we won't get onto it because I think it's tangential. Where you see those pictures that are often produced by a cycling lobby, where they show you how much of the city you could get back if you took the cars out. Yeah, so they go, okay, right. Here's what your city centre looks out. Now let's take out the road and put in some cycle paths. And then, look at all this space that we get back. Look at all that pavement we get back. And it transforms your vision of it. We've got locked in these images of what cities and towns can look like and what the spaces can do. And if we can unlock some kind of imagination and play about that, there's so much we could do. There really, really is, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, brilliant. I'm just also thinking maybe if there was some kind of taxation shift as well to stop money being hoarded, that if you do it to invest in community spaces, that you won't be taxed on it, but you don't have any say on how that money is spent.
Yes, and you
It's
can't,
the community.
you can't put your branding up on it either.
Yes.
Or quite sort of, low key on the ground or something. Because I don't really mind that Hatchards have got their stuff all over that. It reminds me that Hatchards is there, for example. But yeah, something that nudged people to perform generously, I think. And then maybe they get in the habits and they go, oh, I felt kind of good about that. I might just do it for free.
Yeah, but as long as the community can decide how it's spent, because there have been so many cases where big chunks of funding have been dropped from the top down and it never works. And the people on the ground there know what they need. Exactly. And if they could be helped, there are already so many amazing grassroots organisations doing incredible things in towns, and they just need funding. They just need help to do more of it, and that would be great.
Even, you just hand it over. Oh well, they might spend it wrong. Well, yeah, I know, but banks do that all the time, and we sort of don't. It's actually okay to give people a load of money for a community project. Maybe it goes a bit wrong, but they'll have learned more about what they need or what doesn't work. We should people look, exactly what you say. People know what they need on the ground, and they know themselves best, and we don't trust people enough to do that, I think. So I completely agree. More local control, a kind of freedom of imagination over how we use space and so on. It could all be so lovely, couldn't it?
It could. We'll do all we can to make it that way.
Exactly.
Well, I want to say thank you so much. It's been so wonderful to both vent all of this anger, but also keep bringing it back to the positive, because there are incredible things being done. And like you say, economists actually going, maybe that wasn't so great after all, is a huge leap forward. That's great. So I want to say thank you so much for talking about Star Trek with me, for looking at a positive view of the future, for solidarity and frustration with the way things are. If people would love to, and I'm sure they will after this conversation, want to find out more about you and your work, could you tell them where would be the best place to go to do that?
Well, they can certainly find me on my website, which is unamccormack.co.uk. And then there's all sorts of links to the diverse number of social media spaces we now need to have, given that sort of seizure of Twitter and decommonsing of it. So I'm on Blue Sky as well, with the same name. And I did have a newsletter until today, when I found out it was being shut down again. So, but chiefly my website, and then Blue Sky, I guess, is probably the best place. And then other sort of nooks and crannies around the internet.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much. And let's hope that we start to see some of this changing within our lifetime.
Absolutely. I hope so too. Thank you. Really enjoyed it. Thank you.
And yes, I have too. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
You can find other research interviews in the Imagining Tomorrow playlist, or go to www.foe.uk/Imagining Tomorrow to find the episodes released so far, or go to your podcast provider of choice and search for Imagining Tomorrow. Bye!